Manoj Jain, and with my colleague Dr. Mark Musi, we're having a conversation about meditation, mindfulness, and how we can become more compassionate. So, Mark, one of the things that we've talked about is that we can be more compassionate. Now, is it by nature that human beings are compassionate, or is it by nurture that we are compassionate? Is it something that we can learn over time, or is it ingrained in our being or in our DNA?
One of the things I've enjoyed so much about doing this course with you, Manoj, is that our conversations bring up some of the fundamental core issues of philosophy, and trying to decide whether human beings are basically good or basically evil is one of these core issues. And as you might expect, philosophers, theologians, spiritual people, and sages of all stripes have come down on both sides. And in fact, if you think about it, there's probably plenty of evidence to support both cases. I think there's ample evidence to suggest that human beings are evil to the core, but also there's ample evidence to suggest that we really are fundamentally good. And maybe we can simply say that we're both. One thing for sure is I think we can say we have the capacity to be both good and evil, and that it can be a choice that we make. In the Western traditions, we tend to think that human beings have been seen as basically evil. One of the philosophical names that's associated with this point of view is Thomas Hobbes. We sometimes even talk about a Hobbesian view of humanity. Hobbes basically believed that human beings were by nature evil. And we may ask, well, what's the point of making this kind of decision? I mean, does it really matter if we are good by nature or evil by nature? Well, it does matter, because how we live our lives can be based upon an assumption that we make. So Hobbes, who thought that we were fundamentally evil, believed that human beings had to be reined in, that there had to be a strong police force to make sure that people behave themselves, because he assumed that human beings basically were wicked.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you assume that people are basically good, you don't have to police them and rein them in that way. And one of the people who thought that way is one of my favorite philosophers, the Chinese philosopher Confucius. After he died, many of Confucius's own disciples tried to determine whether Confucius himself thought people were fundamentally good or fundamentally evil, and his disciples came down on both sides of it. But interestingly, it's not clear what Confucius himself thought. But what is clear is that Confucius believed that human beings had to be taught how to be kind and compassionate. So whether you're good fundamentally or wicked fundamentally, the process of teaching and learning how to be compassionate is something that we all need.
So what's very clear is that I don't think anyone has that answer to are we fundamentally good or evil. And that's a very broad question and can be an optimistic view or a pessimistic view, as however one wants to look at it. But the concept that we can teach someone compassion, many philosophers have talked about that, but also scientists have begun to research that can we make people more compassionate. So there's a study that I want to talk about, which is really intriguing. And I found it quite interesting, and I've shared it with a group of medical students and others where I teach regularly. And it's about a group of individuals where we were studying them. I wasn't studying them. The researchers were studying them to see if we can teach compassion through mindfulness and meditation. So they took a group of individuals, they gave them an 8-week course, and they studied. They gave another group of individuals just some literature to read. And then they brought them for studying them. They brought them into a waiting room. And they had 3 chairs in the waiting room. They had 2 actors who were sitting on 2 of the chairs. There was 1 chair free. And obviously the subject was brought in and they sat on that chair. And so now all 3 chairs are taken. Then they had a woman who was on crutches, who was in pain, walk into the waiting room. The two actors were on their phones doing something. They would not get up. They were told not to get up. And they wanted to see if the subject would offer his or her chair to the woman who was on crutches. So, very interesting results. A group of people who got meditation, a group of people who did not get meditation, only 16% of those offered their chair. Of the group that received meditation, 50%, almost threefold greater, got up and offered their chair.
Wow.
Now, it's sad that only 50%
Well, that's true.
got up.
But that's an improvement.
But that's a tremendous improvement between this going from 16% to 50%. And the only difference between the two groups, mind you, was that one got 8 weeks of mindfulness training and the other group didn't.
Well, that would seem to suggest that from a scientific perspective, that whether or not we might philosophically regard ourselves as fundamentally wicked or fundamentally good, that there is evidence to suggest that compassion can be learned.
So one of the things that I'm working with is the idea that we make doctors more compassionate. And this is something I've written about in the Washington Post in one of the pieces, is how do we teach empathy to doctors? And that's something that can be taught, that we've seen. And now more and more in medical school, this is part of the training.
As a professor of religious studies, people often ask me, is there anything that all of our religions have in common? You know, and a lot of people want to believe that there is. I think it's a kind of a common modern idea that we want to think that maybe all religions are teaching the same sort of thing. And the truth is they're not. Religions are really quite different from one another. But one of my studies suggests that there is at least one thing on which most religions, and if not most religions, at least the founders and the sages that inspire the religions all seem to agree on, is that compassion and kindness is at the heart of what it means to be truly human. So whether they all believe in God, whether they all believe that there is an afterlife, a resurrection of the dead, the soul that is immortal, various religions differ.
Yeah.
But on the nature of kindness and compassion and its importance in our life, they all seem to agree.
So this is one of the things that I find, that there are many paths to becoming compassionate and kind, right? We can do some type of education, we can do academic teaching and so forth. We can show ways that individuals can be kind. Meditation and mindfulness is one of those paths as well. And what we find is when we practice meditation, we allow ourselves to become more compassionate.
Wonderful.
So with that, I want to finish our conversation today about how mindfulness can make us more compassionate. And in our next conversation, we're going to talk about how mindfulness can allow us to be more insightful and to gain greater wisdom.